Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Tom Seclow. Today's topic, a 360-degree look at the CMO interview and insider dishes on what really happens during the interview process. Tom has been with Spencer Stuart, one of the best search firms, for nearly 25 years after starting his career in advertising at Foot Code and Belding. That is a blast from the past. He specializes in CMO and customer experience searches, and this is his second time on the show. Full disclosure, I've known Tom since our paths crossed when I was an assistant brand manager on Safeguard at P&G, and Tom's now wife was the account executive. Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you, Mike. A pleasure to be back on the show, and thanks for hosting this.
You're more than welcome. Okay, so the plan for today is to look at the interview from the perspective of the candidate, the company, and the search firm. And why don't you start, Tom, by setting the stage for us? A company calls Spencer and says, I want a CMO or I want a head of marketing. What happens next?
Yeah. So the most typical kind of scenario is we sit down with the hiring manager, and the hiring manager it's often the CEO, sometimes divisional president, sometimes accompanied by the head of HR, and they lay out to us what the job entails. And we usually try to get a running start of not just the job that they've spec'd, or maybe even sometimes they're using the spec from when they hired their last CMO, but understand the context of what's happening in the business, what the challenges are that they're facing, and get a broader perspective, which is helpful on a bunch of measures, as you can imagine, to help frame the role and not just lay out the responsibilities of what the marketer, what they think the marketer is there to do, but also how the marketer is going to have impact on the overall business. And we also like to, in that part, we call it the environmental, we like to talk to other people who are going to weigh in. So those who will be interviewing the candidate, we want to get their take too. And often we will find that there isn't complete alignment on what the job is, and it's not our job to solve that necessarily, but at least to flag it so that we have enough alignment that we know what we're looking for, and we know if there are pieces that may not be as apparent.
Yeah, so well put, Tom. So we had a business professor from Darden who basically said that it's very rare in her mind that there is alignment, and a lot of times the company gets the job spec wrong because they are using an old job spec, or they actually may not 100% agree on what they want. How often do you think they need adjustments when they call you in?
Yeah, and let me say something, because I do talk to my peers who recruit functional leaders for CFOs, CIOs, HR, legal counsel, and stuff. And those job specs are much more consistent. Marketing is interpreted different in different companies, even in the same competitive industry sectors.
Right.
We typically will tweak them, and I do think we do get enough alignment on what good looks like. And in fact, when we have searches that go awry, if you trace it back, it's usually because there wasn't alignment on what that job spec was up front. So the job spec is important, and we do interview. We conduct our interviews against those job specs, and we encourage our clients to, follow that also.
So you've talked to the company, you've talked to the hiring manager, and a lot of the panel, now you're setting up for the search. How do you do it? Like, you're calling, just tell us what happens.
Yeah, so we document the job spec. You've seen them probably, and
just a few,
just a few, and they're intended. That document is intended. It is our brief, so it's intended to provide a measuring stick of how we evaluate the candidates, but it's also a marketing document. So it should be written in a way that's going to be enticing and lay out, what the candidate needs to do. And importantly, there's a section on ours called desired outcomes, and that lists 2 or 3 things. And those often make their way into the actual bonus structure for that candidate, the MBO. So, I mean, it's not just a throwaway, but actual, here are the 3 things you got to do in the first year.
Give us a couple examples of what are good, desirable outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think what are poorly written outcomes.
So the more specific they are, the better, generally speaking. So if one of the things is the team is weak and you're being hired to fix the team, to help assess the team that's there, to retrain, to recruit new people as necessary, et cetera. And if there are specifics about, the team, not naming names or positions, but specifics about the team, that's a good thing for somebody coming in to grab onto, to go, oh, I get that. That's what needs to be done. Or if it's about, whatever the topics are that the company is struggling with or needs to be done, something that needs to be fixed. If it's about maintenance or like brand health or kind of general attributes, that's not as good.
Oh, a real conceptual one, like we want our brand to be stronger. That is a weak spec.
Exactly.
Okay, helpful. Thanks. So now, what are you doing now? Are you calling a bunch of candidates and running them by the company, or you're serving?
Not yet. So we get the spec done. We all agree on the spec. Yes, that's what we want to do. We usually start off by doing an exercise of a long list. So this is a bunch of names, usually a couple of dozen names of people, profiles, most of whom we know, but not always, and we try to test our client on that to see kind of how far we can stretch in different directions.
And this is before you've called any of them, right? You're
correct.
You're anonymously putting.
Correct. This is still part of getting alignment.
Yeah. Fact. Okay.
And very often we'll know a number of the people on the list would probably be interested in such a job. And then we have some people on there that may stretch. And a lot of things come out in doing this exercise that didn't come up during the environmental discussions. Things about, we call unconscious bias, but if somebody has an MBA, where they went to school, what their first jobs were, how large the team was that they managed never was an issue. Now it's questionable, or whatever. But a bunch of things come up inevitably in those discussions. Biases about companies. This person worked at that company. I don't respect that company. Or can you imagine the press release if we hired somebody from our direct competitor and they're going to come in here and show us how to do things, sort of thing. But a lot of things emerge in those conversations. And sometimes a company will have partnerships with other companies that they don't really recognize until they see the name on a list. Oh, we can't recruit from that company because they're a partner to us.
Or they're like our biggest vendor, or they're our biggest
vendor or partner. Yes. Precisely. Okay. So that comes up. And then once we get, agreement on that, and often we'll hear from them, oh gosh, I really like these sorts of profiles or these particular people. We've got our direction set and we go into the market. Usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks before a client starts seeing candidates from the time that we start an assignment.
And so after you do this thing where you say, all right, I've anonymized these names and I put them out, and now I understand a little more finely what the company is looking for, then I start reaching out to people, or am I already reaching out to people kind of that I'm certain are going to be in the game?
Well, so, we're constantly in the market. So, and it's a fluid market out there. So people are writing in or calling us about, hey, I'm foreseeing my company's about to be sold, or I just got reorganized out of a job, or I need to move, I got divorced, whatever. People are constantly changing. So, we're working parallel to knowing who's in the market and whatever. And the names are not anonymized, by the way. We talk when we do this long list with a client, we're identifying people. It's an exercise. Right. We haven't reached out to them. In some cases, we'll know somebody's very likely to be interested. Anyway, at that point, we go out into the marketplace. We are talking to people, and we're getting their interest in the role. And once somebody has raised their hand, we will interview them and go into depth about how they match up against a position spec.
And so you would say I could have been on a long list, and you'd say, "This is Mike Linton. He's a sample of what we're looking at. It comes out of consumer goods and has
Right.
done retail or something, and here's so and so from this." And then you start reaching out, or you may know somebody's in the market. And then how many people do you talk to in the beginning? Like,
Yeah.
because you could call hundreds, right?
Yeah, it depends on what the search is. I mean, if it's a very large CMO role, there are going to be fewer people who are going to be qualified just in terms of having managed the size of the budget, the size of the team, et cetera. And they're probably better known to us also because
Right.
we've done similar searches. So in a search like that, probably fewer people. If it is, a company that is either early stage or in a remote location, the numbers of people are going to be greater. A typical search for us is we end up presenting probably 4 to 7 candidates, something like that,
Yeah.
which is enough to have context of what good looks like for our clients and give them choices. But it's not so many. When you start getting past like 7 or 8, the search will take a much longer time. And this may sound obvious, but what drives the timing for a search is the number of candidates that we present and the number of interviews that they go through with our clients. So if a client has a panel of 6 or 7 people, the actual scheduling time
is a bear.
Yeah, if you got 8 candidates and 8, you're talking months just to get through the interview process.
It's a lot of permutations. So meanwhile, back at the hiring company, you've got these candidates coming. We'll talk about how the candidate should handle him or herself as they go through this. But the company is absorbing these, and you give them the 7 names, and they say, "I want to talk to these 3 first, and park Tom in the back," or what happens?
Yeah. So the other thing I mentioned is a fluid market. So when we start presenting candidates, we don't have everybody lined up chronologically. You're going to meet these. Sometimes we're able to do that, but for most of the time we're not. We can get people in there 2 or 3 early on. Sometimes when we're getting briefed on an assignment, sometimes we'll say, "Hey, we know somebody who's fantastic that lines up against this. They're about to get an offer on something else. If you want to see them, they're going to go off the market, but there's a window here if you want to see them." And our clients often will say, "Yeah," or sometimes they'll say, "No, we want to see it in context of other candidates that we'd be able to land, on kind of similar timing." And sometimes that's driven by their own needs. A lot of the searches we do are confidential. There's an incumbent in place.
Right.
And we have to do these under NDA, which slows things down because we have to go back and forth on getting an NDA signed, et cetera. And sometimes there's a vacancy in the role, which is more urgent. Sometimes a company is working toward getting the new hire on in time for a sales meeting or a new product launch. Those kind of variables will drive the timing part of it. But
go ahead.
To answer your question, once they start seeing candidates, the process can get drawn out, and for a variety of reasons. And a lot of our searches, I don't know what the percentage is, a lot of them, they're internal candidates as well. The client says, "Hey, I want you to benchmark this person the same way you're looking at all the external candidates and evaluate them, tell us how good our own."
That adds a degree of difficulty, does it not?
It does. It absolutely does.
So if I'm an external candidate, am I advantaged of being early or late in the process? How should I? And then I get a call from Spencer. What should I do and what shouldn't I do?
Yeah, I think as a candidate, you want to go in kind of in context with the other candidates. So you don't want to be an outlier on either end of it.
So you could be in the middle if you could.
Yeah, yes. But and we try to group them as best we can to give everyone sort of equal footing, but that's difficult to do just because of all the variables we talked about. But if somebody's going in on Monday and the next candidate's going out on Wednesday, that's not really a disadvantage.
But if I come in this week and then the next slate is 2 weeks later, that is a disadvantage, kind of.
It can be, yes.
Got it. That's helpful.
It can be. I mean, it's like when you look at when you're selecting new copy from your creative partners. I mean, the recency effect, it does have an impact. I do think. And
Okay.
I do think there are also things that candidates can do, which I'll talk about in a second, or I can talk about it now.
I'll talk about it right now.
Okay. I think candidates, if they are hungry for a job and they know that they're going in early in the process, in the interviewing process, they can sort of create a little mini campaign for themselves. And I've advised candidates to do this, where you pick up on things in the interview conversation that if it drags into weeks since you were last in there,
right?
Send an email and say, hey, I just came across this, or I was just thinking about a question you asked me in our conversation, and things that show
you send like little crispies back to the company.
Exactly.
I saw this, and here it is.
Exactly.
That I want to stay in your consciousness.
Exactly. But they have to be relevant. So it's not just, hey, remember me, I still want the job.
I read an article with your company in it.
Yeah. And B, you got to balance that fine line of being a pest and showing interest.
So what are some no-nos? You just gave us some, try and be in good context. Recency effect is to your advantage. If you are early and you really want the job, stay connected tastefully. What's some things you should not do as a candidate?
Well, in the interview itself, there are a whole lot of them that I'm sure you've probably heard about or seen.
Yeah, maybe done.
So maybe not.
Yeah.
In the actual interview, but in the process, I think one of the hardest things is patience, and particularly if you're an internal candidate, because this is going on and you're distracted, and of course your interest is hearing back from the company and what's my next step. And they're going through a process that can take weeks, sometimes months, to meet other candidates, and it's usually about wanting to feel thorough that they've met a lot of people. It's a big decision. The intention is to keep this new executive as part of their C-suite for a long time to come, and they want to make sure they get it right. And I think from a candidate's perspective, it's like, why am I not hearing back?
Yes.
I haven't heard anything. Gosh darn it. Tom Seclow has not returned. I haven't heard back from him. The reason that you haven't heard back typically is that, there is no news that they're, and where's the feedback on me? The feedback is typically comparative. I like this about this person and that about somebody else. So they need a point of comparison to have that and provide it, in the context of how you're doing. So, I know it's an easy thing for me to say, to be patient, but how
long is patience before you reach out? Like, if I don't hear anything from Tom Seclow, who I know is very busy and important, but if I don't hear anything for 2 to 3 weeks, do I reach out to you to show that I'm interested, or do I play it cool and do nothing?
There's no harm in reaching out and saying I'm interested. I think, when frustration shows through of why am I not getting any feedback? And part of my role in this is I try to give every candidate real feedback that goes through a process. So I know that they're preparing for this. It's they take time off. They're often traveling to go meet with clients, or at least they're studying up, and they're putting their heart on the line in doing this. And part of my role is to give them real feedback, whether they are selected or not. And if they're not selected, to know how they showed up. I've spent time with them, and I took a bet on them too. So it's important for me, and I want to know if I'm going to present this person again, that I learn, at least through my client's eyes, how they showed up in this, and to give real feedback to the candidates of, here's how you did, and not just say, oh, it wasn't a cultural fit, because I think that's
like, we want the brand to be strong.
Yeah. But if somebody goes to an interview and they're talking too much, which is probably the number one thing that I do hear back on candidates who are not successful, I tell them, you talk too much. You got to listen for cues of when, and I've kind of traced this back. I think the reason that a lot of candidates talk too much, and this is not just for CMOs, it's for all execs, and I do a lot of CEO work. They're under the impression that they want to be able to sell their accomplishments. And as I've already described the process to you, they're sort of pre-sold by the time they get there. So the client is really interested in digging in and understanding content and how they're going to feel in their organization. And, they want it to be more of a give and take. It's not a sales pitch per se for the candidate to wind up and tell them about, how they stole 3 points a share from whatever.
I increased our search word buying efficiency. So you're a finalist. Do you know you're a finalist? Like, do you tell everybody like there's 3 finalists or 2 finalists, or you're the number one slot because you got to be running at slate, right?
Yeah, I let people know where they are to some extent. I'll say, hey, there are 3 other people who are still involved in the process. I want you to know that. And I need to know also from the candidate if they're actively looking and engaged in other searches. I need to manage a process with my clients. So I need to say, hey, are you far along on other things? You don't have to share with me if it's confidential or you don't want to, but just let me know where you stand in that. So I'm not surprised. And a lot of the time, candidates will signal to me, yeah, I've got 2 other things going on. There's one that's much more interesting to me. So I'm still interested in this, but I don't know if I'm going to get the other job. And, we'll help play that into the equation.
And how about when like they say there's a lead candidate, but you're still in the running? Do you tell people that like you're the backup choice, or how does that work?
Depending on the circumstance. So I can't abdicate any negotiation position and tell somebody you're our absolute choice in this.
Right. They really want you and nobody else. And
yeah, I'm reluctant to do that in most circumstances, and it is circumstantial. But if somebody tells me, hey, you know what, I'm looking at 2 things right now. They're about on equal footing. I could see myself doing either of them. And I know that they're a runner-up on our search. I will let them know that, hey, my client's giving priority to another candidate in this. I'm not sure we'll get an offer out, or I'm not sure the offer will be accepted, but I want you to be able to have that information while you're making your decision too.
And am I, as a candidate, should I ask you that question directly, or should I let you come to me with it? And will all search firms do the same thing with it?
I can't answer the last part of your question, but I have no problem. I appreciate it when someone, I appreciate when someone is open with me about it, and I'll tell them, what I can. But it's, I think we're both being a little bit cagey there. I'm as open as I can about where they stand in the process.
Yeah.
I won't tell them any specifics about other candidates. A lot of candidates will ask me that, does this person, am I competing against somebody who's got this sort of background or that sort of background? That's not going to
you can't do that.
I can't, and it's not really helpful for them anyway.
Also, you can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
I'm not going to go back and get a degree from a different school.
Exactly.
I guess I could, but I'm not going to. So tell us the funniest recruiting story you could tell on the air.
Well, so, we're dealing with a lot of personal situations and careers and moving people and things like that. So there are a lot of things that happen that seem funny at the time, but they're kind of personal. But I can share a story that one of the things that happens a lot of the time, and most times actually, before somebody goes to meet with a client organization in person, they'll ask about wardrobe. What should I wear? How do they dress?
Exactly.
Men and women. They both want to know how's the rest of the organization dress. And my typical advice is to be a little dressier than the client organization. I'll describe how the client dresses. So, if it's farmers, the guys wear plaid shirts for the most part, and you want to look. You shouldn't wear a suit and tie to that kind of organization, and you want to I think carry yourself so that they could see you in their environment, but be a little dressier than they.
Yeah.
And then that makes sense to most people. I had one not that long ago where the client called me the next day and said, gave me some feedback on the candidate, said, we're not sure we want to go forward with her. She had overwhelming amount of fragrance on. And I would never have thought to
think about the fragrance.
And the hiring manager had a real aversion to her. She had very sensitive olfactory senses. And anyway.
I do remember interviewing at eBay the first time, and I wore a tie, and I made it past that interview, obviously, but they said, if you wear a tie the next time, we're going to cut that off. And,
yeah.
So I think there's something there.
You don't want to look like you're from another time zone.
Exactly. So wrap up. We're almost out of time. So wrap up the session with some practical advice for our listeners that we haven't talked about so far.
Yeah. So we didn't talk about the interview itself very much. And
All right, let's do that.
Okay. So, well, a few things. If you're looking for a job, I think it's important when you contact recruiters or your network to have a real good understanding of yourself. And if you're a marketer, think of yourself as a brand. Actually, if you're not a marketer, think of yourself as a brand. It's not that you want a job, it's that you want a career choice. And you have to define what those parameters are. And it's, my colleagues and I all get lots of calls and emails saying, right, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this. I flip that around typically and say, well, whose job do you want to have?
Yeah.
What's the right next job for you? And don't put it on me to evaluate, you did this, this, and this. So here's the best job for you. I want you to tell me, gosh, my dream job is to be the CMO of this company because it involves technology, media, and entertainment. And those are my three passions, or whatever it is. And even go as far as to make a list of the companies. It doesn't matter if somebody's in the job,
right?
It's just something to signal these are the kinds of companies that I would be most interested in for you to think of me for.
So that's step one in the interview, is to have a brand and a story.
Yeah, and that's really more for job seekers. And I'm distinguishing here because a lot of the people we place are not job seekers. They're entrenched in their job today. And we reach out to them and say, hey, here's a terrific role for these reasons and next step up in your career or whatever that is. So anyway, framing what the opportunity is and what you're good at, I think, is really important. And you as a brand and how you should be thought of by recruiters and by your own personal network, either of which are going to be conduits for your next career kind of progression. The interview itself, I think it's really important to tell stories and to have your stories down and not try to address what you think the client's situation needs, even though they may ask you.
Yeah.
But tell stories that are parallel to what the job requirements are. What happens sometimes when a candidate has studied an awful lot about a client situation, they'll come in there and say, oh, you ought to be doing this, this, and this.
That's a really bad thing.
Yeah, you're leading with your chin, obviously, because they may have tried this, this, and that, or you don't know their business, or just the idea of doing that is probably going to put somebody off. Maybe later.
Oh yeah, I want you bridging to an example that I can take if I want, but don't tell me about a business that we've been working on for 50 years that you're not even in.
Exactly. So you can say, when I faced a similar sort of situation, here's what this, and stories, by the way, should have a beginning, middle, and end. Here's what the situation was. Here's what I did with the team. Here's what the outcome is. And the outcome needs to be punctuated with facts, figures,
some numbers,
something measurable.
And then everyone loved me. So what, those are the two things. So what's a last piece of practical advice for the interview that we could close the show on?
Send a thank you note.
I like, what should you put in the thank you note? Like, do you want to give a perfect
send the thank you note and tailor the thank you note to the interviewers. The client organizations, they do share. They'll say, "Oh gosh, you got the same note as me."
Yeah. No, yeah. Don't make it exactly the same, because that becomes hilarious. That just becomes hilarious. I've been on that where it's like, this is the nicest thank you note I ever got, except for the one that Tom got, which is exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, you laugh at that, but it does happen.
No, I've shared it around with my team.
And then the other advice that I offered is, if you're in a process, be cool about the time you check in, especially if you're getting disgruntled or if you're heading toward an offer on something else, make sure you're checking in. And then I think it's incumbent, on the recruiter to give feedback. That's at the right point of actual feedback, something that's going to be constructive, something you're going to learn from. I mean, you don't go out on that many job interviews, and it's an enormous amount of time and commitment to do that. So make sure you're collecting feedback, and that's on me, as a recruiter too. But I think it's on the person who's being recruited. Don't just, if you didn't get it, don't walk away with your tail between your legs and go, oh gosh, that was not a good experience. Learn from it.
Well, and I hear you also saying, ask for the feedback if you don't get it. And then all they can do is say no. So that is a great way to wrap this up. Thank you, Tom. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. Look for more of our shows on Evergreen, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include an operations-trained CEO dishes on what he really thinks about marketing. A B-School professor talks about brand value, measures, and the metaverse. And a primer on the marketing CFO and why you might need it for your organization. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.
Today's episode of CMO Confidential is brought to you by CMOcoaches.com. Are you a current or aspiring chief marketing officer looking to take your career to the next level? You should work with a CMO coach. CMO coaches are former CMOs who are nationally certified coaches. So whether you want to improve your leadership skills, develop your team, or drive better business results, we have the experience and expertise to help you succeed. To learn more, visit us at CMOcoaches.com.